Hello, welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. Me again, no Joe, no Alex, no warm embraces, no cool hands, or however Joe says it. But Nick Miller's coming on to talk about Forest. Actually, it's a bit of a broader chat. We talked to Nick about all kinds of things, and it's great fun. I haven't seen Nick for a couple of months, obviously because of the conditions in the UK. But really nice to catch up, talk about Forest past, their present, their future, also about his family's links with Forest. And his relationship with his parents. It's a really good listen. I hope people enjoy it. So without any further ado, let's get going. Okay, so you know how on a lot of podcasts, a lot of very popular podcasts, they have that little bit where they record the conversation before the podcast where no one's really talking about the subject they've been brought on to talk about, but it's kind of a cool way to begin. Do you know that, Nick?
You've just walked in the room, maybe someone's got a coffee, you know, you're talking about your journey here, something like that, and then you go, oh, hello, the light's on red. We're recording.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm a composed professional broadcaster. This is just how easy this all looks. I'm not actually, in the background sweating profusely and worried that I don't know enough about the subject we're here to talk about. It's that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're giving off the vibe of relaxed professionalism.
Okay, so you're here to. So I brought you on under the premise of giving the opportunity to have a bit of a moan about Forest, and we will do that. I shall be your Dr. Melfi, and you can be be you. But how are you? I haven't spoken to you for ages.
I'm all right. I'm okay. I'm, everything. The world is tumbling around our ears, but I'm kind of staying indoors a lot. So it's, broadly speaking, not happening as far as I'm concerned. So,
are you in an area that's been locked down?
Well, I'm in South London, so we are being moved into Tier 2. We're recording this on Friday morning, so by midnight tonight we'll officially be in Tier 2 lockdown. Still slightly unclear as to what that means, but I think it just means just stay indoors for a bit. So I'm going to try and do that and not go absolutely tonto.
And this is the thing, isn't it? Because I read through the tiers again yesterday, and they all sound very, very similar. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a kind of a rant about coronavirus, because I don't think the world needs more coronavirus content. I don't think, but this is the problem. I'm confused as to what I can and can't do, depending on which part of the country I'm in, and it's baffling. It's absolutely baffling.
It's good that everything is fine and proceeding as normal in the world of football to distract us from the chaos of the real world, isn't it?
It sure is. I mean, it's been a very normal football weekend. But before we get to that, though, like you, what's your job title now at Totally? Because obviously Totally is now part of The Athletic, and we all get super important sounding job titles.
I think the job title on my contract is senior writer, and I have various responsibilities. I still work on the Totally Football show, and I do the Totally Football website, social media. I'm also involved with producing a number of other podcasts, which a couple of which are out at the moment. One is called The Next Big Thing, which is about the most promising young players in the Premier League. There is another one called Beyond the Headline, which is kind of what it sounds like, really, which we're currently working on one about the Neymar transfer from Barcelona to PSG and the kind of ripple effects of that.
Is that going to be like a documentary on that transfer?
Documentary style podcast. At the moment, it's looking like it's going to be in 3 parts, about how the transfer came about and what the wider impact of it was. Obviously, Barcelona used the money to rather unwisely buy Felipe Coutinho and Ousmane Dembele, and then the money that Liverpool got for Coutinho allowed them to buy the spine of a Champions and Premier League winning team. So I'm not sure when that's going to be out, but it should be interesting.
Got another question for you, because we've both been through this situation recently. Do you miss match reporting? because obviously it's not really part of your job anymore. It's not really part of my job anymore. Do you miss the Saturdays and the Sundays and the midweek games?
Sometimes I miss, but I don't think it's necessarily missing it on a sort of individual level. I just miss it in connection with missing the rest of normal football. I miss being at games with crowds, and I miss having the very different perspective you get from being at the game rather than watching on TV. And I miss the I miss the sort of visceral parts of football rather than just the sort of because obviously you're obviously one step removed when you're watching on TV anyway, but when there isn't a crowd and you're having to choose between silence and piped in crowd noise, you're a step removed from it as well. So I'm not especially missing for various reasons, traipsing up and down the country, going to games and getting back at weird times, and not seeing my partner as much as I really should do. So I'm not. It's at the moment I'm not missing it enormously, and I'm enjoying sort of watching football as a fan again to a point. But I am. It is also a worry that it's just like a kind of like it's a sort of muscle that you that not engaging with a particular game in the sort of intense way that you generally do when you're at a game and you have to write something specifically about that game. You kind of worry that muscle is going to get flabby, and you drift away from kind of being on top of what's going on, and you drift away from having a sort of more informed opinion about games. Because it's very easy when there's no kind of professional imperative to watch, game on Sunday afternoon, to just kind of go, I don't really need to watch this. I'll just kind of go off and make a gravy or something.
Make a gravy.
Yeah, just it's just something else that kind of needs doing that you don't necessarily you wouldn't necessarily have the chance to do if you were on the train to Leicester or whatever it is to actually report on a game. So it's odd at the moment. I'm missing it less than I thought I was going to. That's the short answer that you were probably looking for. But when crowds come back, and if I'm still not going to games quite as much, then maybe I'll miss it more then.
What's funny is like some of the hardships are actually what I do miss. I mean, take the current situation out of the equation. Like, all right, the most exciting part of the week was you get up early. If you're going to I live in the south. I did. And if you were going north, you'd have to get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and you'd be at the station if it was winter and it was still dark. You're sitting on the station, you get on the train, first coffee, and you're going somewhere, and you get there, and I was always habitually early for football, so I'd be there if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, 12:05. Because your Premier League rules mean that you have to open your stadium to the media 3 hours before kickoff. And I used to love walking around, not the media parts, but just the empty stadium. I don't know why that. I think I just like the that scene in Goodfellas where they walk through the kitchen. It's a little bit like that, because you're able to kind of go somewhere that nobody else is at that point in time. I think I just like the feeling of self-importance. I think that's what we're about to reveal.
Yeah, I am allowed in these places. You
are not.
Puny serfs are not.
And and you get to see things like stewards walking around doing their last security checks, and concession stands opening up and piling up bags of Maltesers, and those weird sort of hot doggy things that you get. Where the bread entirely encircles the sausage. I'm not even sure what that's called, but those. And it's weird. It's a strange thing. Okay, let's.
I remember I was at a Brighton game a couple of years ago, and I saw I think the media entrance is the same as the entrance the referees go in, and I saw the refereeing crew turn up in this kind of
uniform.
Yeah, they were all in uniform, all in the kind of the same tracksuit. Or they showed up in this kind of blacked out windowed Land Cruiser or minibus or something like that, and it felt a little bit like seeing your teacher in the shops,
Yes.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Just kind of officials out in the wild, but not quite out in the wild, and it was something that you'd probably only see if you A, were there ludicrously early, and B, were allowed in the kind of media section. So yeah, that weirdly, I agree, those little things I quite miss.
And they're kind of when they go onto the pitch and they're still in their uniform, they wear like dark suits and sort of tan brogues. It's a funny little outfit. But they before the stadium opens, they go out onto the pitch and they're with the ball and they test the goal line technology at either end. And it's always the referee who dribbles the ball from the halfway line. And there's like, you can see the kind of the fear of going viral in these people, because they get to about, like, if it was me and I don't know, if someone needed me to test goal line technology at White Hart Lane, I think I'm going to go from about 25 yards, because you have to, don't you? You have to do it with a little bit of, I don't know, bit of swagger. Referees, invariably, they go almost to the penalty spot before very tamely toe poking the ball in. It's I feel like that describes some kind of character trait in these people.
Yeah, it feels like there are only two acceptable ways to do it. You either go for something spectacular, you try the kind of Gareth Bale / Ronaldo kind of wobble free kick from 30 yards.
Or you try and knuckleball it in a pair of
try and knuckleball it, or you take it to within 6 inches of the goal line and absolutely leather it. So
exactly that.
Anything else seems like a waste of time.
It's a waste of opportunity, Nick. It's like you're there, you're doing it, and it's as if these people have kind of they're seeing their future as they're doing it. Be like, oh, Andre Mariner falls on his arse and spoons the ball into, if he was a Craven Cottage, into the Thames or something like that, and it becomes this massive viral hit. And it's just like, come on, live a little bit dangerously. Right, I felt that was pretty good, sort of cool guy intro to the pod. That worked quite well. We might do that again. Probably not when Joe and Alex are here, because they won't allow me to, but it was good this time. And let's move on to Forest. So we're going to get to the agony aunt bit, because I feel like that involves quite a lot of Forest modern history. But let's trace your roots of Forest. You're a Forest fan. I think I'm right in saying your mum and dad are Forest fans too.
Yeah, here's the dirty little secret. My dad was a Chelsea fan until he met my mum. They met at university and was kind of quickly converted, and just in time as well. They got married in 1975, I think it was.
That's good timing. That is very, very good timing.
And they first got a season ticket, I think the season that Forest got promoted from the second division, or they certainly first started going regularly then. And yeah, they were given the choice. In 1979, they just moved into a new house, and they had the choice between buying carpets for the new house or going to the European Cup final in Munich. And I'm happy to say they made the correct choice.
Good, fantastic.
Had some fashionable bare floorboards for a little while. So yeah, my mum's been going since she was very, very little. Took me to my first game in 1988, I think it was, which was a 1-0 defeat to Wimbledon, and I was instantly hooked. I was kind of born at probably the worst possible time to be a Forest fan, because in those kind of first 4 or 5 years, Forest went to Wembley 5 times, I think, won a couple of trophies. There was this sort of veneer of success that, paled in comparison to the previous success, but the veneer of success nonetheless, and it was just close enough to the real glory days for my dad and for my mum and for other people for it to be very clear in their memories and them to be able to recall it very quickly. So I was treated to these great tales of when Forest sat astride English and European football while having moderate success that I could see in front of me. And then from 1993 onwards, it's kind of been a not quite uninterrupted downward spiral, but downward spiral with a few little upticks in it, and all the while sort of celebrating our glorious past. So I wouldn't change it for the world being a Forest fan, but it is pretty tough going sometimes.
You know what's interesting about Forest is that I feel like they occupy quite a unique position, because obviously almost, most football fans, even if they don't know the texture of it, they're aware of what happened with those 2 European Cups. They know the story. They at least know the outlines of the story. I feel like if you're not a Man United fan and if you're not a Liverpool fan, then you invariably have a little bit of a soft spot for Forest. Forgetting obviously Derby County supporters, but like they represent something which, obviously to every football fan is like the dream. Is that kind of that rise? It's all the optimism and the kind of the thing that keeps you going to football every week, because you want to believe that you can. What's the famous quote that Clough and Taylor found a shipwreck and turned it into an ocean liner, isn't it? And that's the dream as a fan, but also because of where they came from, because they're not a Man United and because they're not a Liverpool. A lot of fans I don't know, I've spoken to people that seem to live vicariously a little bit through what happened to Forest under Clough, and it's just it's a strange thing, because also now you look at, if you know that story well, you know also that it can never happen again, which is it's a very difficult thing to get your head around. It's very dispiriting if you linger on it, actually.
Yeah, and particularly for Forest fans of a certain age, maybe I am slightly protected from it, given that I wasn't there to kind of really experience the glory days, so I can't quite experience the despair that it's never going to happen again that people of the generation older than me do. But on speaking of generational things, I think the kind of idea of Forest as a kind of you very often see these kind of, if I designed the Premier League and if I picked which teams were in
Forest
the Premier
are always
League.
in it.
Forest, I think Forest are always in it for people of a certain generation.
Yeah.
And I think that generation's not disappearing, but I think loosely speaking, it's going to be people under the age, it's over the age of about 30. I think Seb, you and I think we're a similar age, and I think
we won't mention what that similar age is, but yes,
no,
we
that
are.
would be awfully rude. But I think we are of the last generation to think of Forest as a default big team, just simply because Forest haven't been in the Premier League since 1999, and 21 years is a very long time. It's quite literally a lifetime, and so why would someone who started watching football or started being kind of really aware of football in, say, 2002 or something like that, why would they think of Forest as a big team? They would just be aware of this kind of side that people older than them talked about with sort of slightly misty eyes and irritating nostalgia. So I think even a team like Portsmouth, I think for a generation slightly younger than us, if a 30-year-old or someone in their late 20s maybe was going to pick a team that are not currently in the Premier League that they think should be in the Premier League or they associate with being a big club, they would pick someone like Portsmouth. So I wonder how long the sort of nostalgia fueled elevation of Forest as a good / romantic team is going to last. It's obviously, given that it's based on things that happened 40 years ago, it's already lasted quite a long time, but I wonder how long that is actually going to last.
Do you think part of this, part of what I find strange is that the Forest team that won the European Cups, it's not spoken of in the same way as the Liverpool teams, the 68 United team. Do you think one of the reasons is the people involved in it? Because take Clough away and you've got a lot of really engaging personalities, a lot of really brilliant players, but players that don't really exist in the kind of the game's consciousness in the same way, quite unjustly. Like if you think of someone like John McGovern's the obvious one, isn't it? guy won two European Cups, and yet he's kind of like, if you asked the average, let's say, 28-year-old whether they'd heard of John McGovern or even John Robertson, like it's strange to me that they don't occupy the same place on the mountain. And that's it's because, for instance, like, we worked together a long time ago when Tifo had a website. You went off and did a fabulous interview with John Robertson in the pub, if I remember rightly, and you just sat.
It was, and Gary Birtles turned up unexpectedly. It was wonderful.
Gary Birtles once fat shamed me at Molineux. I'm not joking. Like, I was sat having my meal before I can't remember which game it was, a couple of years ago now, and well, no, it can't have been about a year ago, because I was supposed to. I did end up getting married, but I was supposed to get married in June of this year. Ended up in August, and I was kind of becoming conscious of my weight. I was like, I've got to lose about a stone. And so one of the perils of covering football is the buffet and the amount of food that you're exposed to across the course of a working day. And so I sat down at one of the desks at Molineux and had a salad. And Birtles sits down next to me and mocks me for having a salad. I'd never had a conversation before with Gary Birtles. Like, the thing is what I'm trying to get at is, firstly, with players from with the players who've occupied the same space in the game, so won European Cups before, A, you don't really see them in media areas. B, Dennis Law probably doesn't go around fat shaming people for eating salads. It's like a slightly different type of person that's come out of the kind of the Forest fairy tale. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's partly that. I mean, not for the majority of the players in that team, that it will be the thing they're most famous for. Not many of them went on to do anything particularly big after winning those European Cups or winning the league in 1978. Peter Shilton obviously is an exception. Viv Anderson went on to play for United and Arsenal. I'm not sure he won a huge amount actually, but Trevor Francis is playing
immortalised by his transfer fee, though, isn't he?
Immortalised by the transfer fee and the winning goal in the 79 final. He kind of went on to have a decent career, but kind of ruined by. I mean, essentially derailed by an Achilles injury. I think he had just before the second European Cup final. But Robertson declined relatively quickly after that. McGovern went on to play for Bolton, I think he did. Ian Bowyer kind of came and went. Martin O'Neill didn't really have much of a huge amount of a playing career after Forest. Similar with Larry Lloyd and Kenny Burns. Frank Clark, I think I'm right in saying that the 1979 European Cup final was his last ever game. So Tony Woodcock, I think, went on to do very well in Germany.
Archie Gemmell had his moment, obviously.
But even that was the '78 World Cup, so that was even before the European Cup winning teams. So I think that's kind of part of it, and it also feeds into this thing that I know the players in that team are still slightly, I don't know whether bitter is quite the right word, but they're still aware that they were seen at the time as the phrase they all use is ragtail Bob team. That was just this kind of collection of misfits thrown together, and the great alchemy of Clough and Taylor merged these collection of relatively average talents into a team that did some extraordinary things for 3 years, which to an extent is true, but I know that they are, again, bitter's probably not the right word, but they think they don't get the credit that they deserve.
They've been shortchanged.
They've been shortchanged individually. Yeah. They all obviously speak with great reverence about Clough, and it's quite interesting that it's not always necessarily that they think I wasn't given the credit for my talent that I deserved. They will often point to teammates, like and Robertson is the big one, that people like Birtles and Woodcock and John McGovern will talk for hours about what a genius John Robertson was and how he wasn't given the credit he deserved and how he wasn't elevated to the kind of the sort of heights of praise that he might have done if he had played for Liverpool, for example, which is the sort of inevitable thing with A, playing for a relatively small provincial club, but B, the star of that team wasn't any of the players, it was Clough.
Which is quite a unique thing. I mean, you can't even really make that argument for Busby because obviously Best-Law, Charlton, Liverpool, you have that succession of dynastic managers who, sit alongside the players that they coached. What's John Robertson like? Because he's the one that sort of, I know this Forest team through, the books that have been written about them, the documentaries that have been made. Like, I don't think if you were to write a book about that Forest period, I would probably buy it within an hour. It's weird. I kind of have this strange attachment to it. I have nothing to do with. I don't think I've even been to Nottingham before. Don't support Nottingham Forest. I don't have any kind of. There's no crossover in the Venn diagram between me and. But it's just a fascinating period. But the stories with him. I love the idea of what he was. The kind of the character that Peter Taylor was kind of lecturing by the hotel swimming pool. Versus a player that, I've heard the comparison that it's without probably the pace, but Robertson is Ryan Giggs but with a right foot. Which is just it's an amazing thing to imagine. But you've spent time with him. What's he like as a person?
He always seems to be a guy who has very, very little ego. Certainly in comparison to his talent, which I think probably stems from what we were just talking about, that he isn't kind of given the credit that a lot of people think he deserves, and with that doesn't not inevitably, but with that kind of comes a relative lack of ego. He's always, on the sort of few occasions I've been in his company and other people have praised him, he's always very bashful about it, and you can see that to a certain extent in the film as well. In I Believe in Miracles, where the rest of the team line up to call this guy a genius, but he is very sort of very modest about the whole thing, and he's kind of saying, well, I was a good player, and I know Clough thinks I was a good player, but he doesn't have the sort of outward self-confidence that someone of his talent and someone who is kind of consistently praised by his peers anyway, that you might think. And it's just kind of generally quite an unassuming guy. He's not, even when he was a player, it was the thing, my dad is my dad's favourite player, and my dad always used to say he's never seen anyone that looks less like a footballer than John Robertson. Which is partly because he had a little belly, and partly because he was just this kind of slightly shambling guy who wore scruffy clothes and always had a cigarette on the go.
Only seemed to own one pair of shoes throughout his entire career. Yeah,
that kind of thing. And even now, obviously you meet ex-professional footballers now, and you can and you can sort of, there is an awareness that this guy was a professional athlete at some point in his life. Robertson, there's no hint of that now, as really there wasn't when he was a player.
Okay, so we'll probably have a few younger people that don't know about this period of Forest history, but also don't really know anything about John Robertson. So pause the podcast and go and just type his name into YouTube. There's actually a wonderful highlight reel of Forest progress to the first European Cup final, set to, I think, Born to Run by Springsteen. You just see what a good player John Robertson is, and you can actually find out there's a 20 minutes of Robertson highlights somewhere. Might not still be there, but it was there a few years ago. So see if you can dig that out. We will go for a quick break and be back again very shortly. Okay, Nick. So you're too young for that to have seen that period of Forest history firsthand. What's your favourite Forest memory?
My favourite Forest memory is quite a sort of personal one, really. It was a game against Derby a few years ago, and it when Forest won in the last minute. Ben Osborne, a homegrown player who's actually from Derby, and his family were Derby supporters. He's now moved on to Sheffield United, obviously. He scored a 92nd minute goal, I think. Forest won 2-1, and I was there with my dad, who a few months earlier had a heart attack and was, as heart attacks go, it was relatively minor, but he had a heart attack, and just the. I have been to very few Forest games over the years as a fan without Dad, and it's never the same when he isn't there. So with all of that and the very real prospect that he wasn't going to be around anymore, and him being there, and us being together at the game for this kind of incredible climactic moment. It was also Stuart Pearce's, I think, penultimate game as Forest manager. It was certainly very close to the end of his tenure, and if Forest had lost that game, then he would almost certainly have been sacked, as he was, a couple of weeks later. But it was just this confluence of unlikely events that came together to produce the kind of perfect moment of being a football fan. For fans of bigger clubs, that kind of thing might feel quite small time. It was just one game, admittedly quite a big game against local rivals, but it was just one game in a season where Forest didn't really do very much. Certainly didn't win anything, but the way I've kind of grown up watching football and going to see Forest, it was incredibly important to me, and I really should have just jacked it in at that point. As we were kind of alluding to earlier on, Forest aren't going to win the European Cup again. They're not going to win the Premier League unless something absolutely implausible happens. And, at the moment, they're making a very good go of never being able to get in the Premier League again. So that sort of thing is what I still go to football for, to kind of search for a moment like that. And I'm not really sure it's going to take quite a confluence of events to top that. And really, I should have just quit while I was ahead and never gone to another football game as a fan ever again. But I've been back, and I went to the Forest Derby game the following season where I think Forest lost 5-0. So, ruined that one.
There's something interesting in there, because when life throws up its traumas, and my dad had a heart attack about 20 years ago as well, and it's a scary thing when it happens. But when these things happen, when they rattle you, when there's a kind of an uncertainty in life, whether it be like a family thing or a job thing or a relationship thing, it's amazing how much comfort football seems to offer. Like, you can have I'll give you an example. It's very different. I was going through, it'd be about 12 or 13 years ago now, and I was going through a really difficult time with the job I was in at the moment, big old recession out in the world, and it was a company that was linked to the property industry. Shows how weird my career has been, and wasn't very happy. Was living in a real shithole of a place in London that I could barely afford anyway. And I remember it was the night that Tottenham drew 4-4 with Arsenal at the Emirates, and I went to the pub to watch it with a couple of friends, and I remember getting utterly hacked off at 4-2 and leaving. Just, you're having the proper strop, just like, fuck this, whatever. I think Alan Hutton had just passed it straight to Adebayor for the third time that night or something, and it broke me. It's like, when football throws something up which makes you hemorrhage inside, you just think, I cannot have any more of this. And I just walked out, and I was like, I'll just walk home, whatever. And I was walking back, and between that happening and me walking to the next pub, I walked past the next pub at the moment that Genus makes a 4-3, runs up, takes the ball off Gal Clichy, curls it into Arminia's far post, and it's 4-3, and running the ball back to the halfway line. And I went into the pub, and Obviously, everyone knows Aaron Lennon ends up scoring, making it 4-4. And it was incredible. There were just all these. This was in South London, so very much not Tottenham territory. But there are all these Tottenham fans in there, and they all. It just felt at the time like everyone was just as hacked off with everything to do with their life as I was at that moment, and it was just this wild mess of celebration in the pub. And there were people. This was 2008, I think. So this was every pub in the country has gone gastro by then. There isn't the idea of going to pubs to watch football anymore. It's kind of it's on the way out, which is desperately sad. And it was just it was one of those moments where football just shows up for you, gives you a little bit of an adrenaline shot, at a bit of a little bit of a boost at a really timely moment. And so when you say that's kind of, it seems all inconsequential, to fans of big clubs, I think anybody that's ever followed a football club will kind of relate to that weird little habit the game has of just being able to pick you up and just say, yeah, it'll be shit in a week's time. Don't get me wrong. It was probably for 6 months after that. But at that precise moment, it's just there. And it's just here's a thing. Here's a nice thing for you. And in your case, here's a nice thing for you and your dad, because it's been really, really rubbish for a while. I think that's the magic of the game.
Yeah, and it's just provides some kind of normalcy as well. I wrote a piece about this a few years ago, and I included this next bit in it as well. But earlier in the year that Dad had a heart attack, my sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was quite a spicy year. I went back up to Nottingham on the day that England played Uruguay in the 2014 World Cup. And we all kind of gathered at my parents' house. A few other family members were there as well. We watched the game, and we kind of we didn't really care about England losing. We weren't massively involved with the kind of intricacies of the game. But it was just this kind of thing to firstly take your mind off the kind of awful realities of everything that was just there when you needed it. And, it just provided some kind of some sort of normalcy and something to take your mind off things that genuinely matter, which isn't to say that football doesn't matter, but it matters less than those other things, and you can use it to distract yourself.
That's the word I was going to use. It's life's great distraction. That's its role, really. For some people, it becomes a little bit more than that. Like the people that sort of, hang around at outside stadiums on non-match days, hoping to be interviewed by Sky Sports. For that kind of person, don't know. But I think a lot of people, it's the other thing, that you have, and the other place to go. So Monday Forest, moments like that. Let's skip to the immediate present. Sabri Lamucci is gone. Championship manager, legend from the 90s, obviously. What went wrong there? Because I'm not going to pretend to have paid a huge amount of attention to Forest last season, but I saw the game against Leeds, which I thought they were excellent in. There's a lot of players there that are quite talented. Really like the goalkeeper, by the way. I think he's excellent. What happened towards the end of last season? I know I'm building up to that Stoke game and what happened with Swansea, and asking you to relive what is obviously a big trauma, but it doesn't. From an outsider, it felt like something that was typically Forest, but without me really being able to explain why that is.
I mean, the sort of the actual answer to what happened is that in a weird way you could see in that Leeds game. That Leeds game was the way that Forest could play last season. It was a lot of solid defence, but playing on the counter attack and not really having a great deal of possession, and doing one thing quite well, which worked until it wasn't quite as neat as it working until lockdown, but you could kind of split the season up for Forest roughly in that, and that worked for a little while, and then all of a sudden it didn't work, and it didn't work in quite flamboyant fashion. There were a couple of games post lockdown where Forest were quite unlucky not to kind of pick up various wins, but equally you could say that they were quite unlucky in the same way on a few different occasions. So then you start to think that isn't actually unlucky, that's just a recurring problem, particularly with conceding late goals. And when you have a team that don't score very many goals, only have one striker to speak of, and only really had 12 or 13 players that you could probably hang your hat on, then that kind of thing is inevitably going to sort of catch up with you. The sort of mad trolley dash of around the transfer market this summer is kind of ludicrous enough. At the time of recording, Forest have signed a mere 13 players, but by the time people listen to this, it may have ticked up to 15.
Anthony Knockhart.
Anthony
Probably
Knockhart
will be one of them.
It will be one of them. Possibly Kamil Grzycki as well coming in.
Good player.
All good players, but it compares very unfavourably to the January transfer window when Forest not only didn't really sign anyone, but probably made the team or the squad worse. Signed a guy who I felt so sorry for, because he, at some point, someone had told him he was a professional footballer. And he had a contract to be a professional footballer, so he didn't have people hadn't really dissuaded him of this fact, but he's and I've had plenty of comparison here. One of the worst footballers I've ever seen. Diakabi, his name was. We signed him on loan at the last minute from Huddersfield Town, and yeah, there was just there was. It's a sort of typically Forest thing to just get things a bit wrong, and the timing of things getting them a bit wrong. If you want to go kind of all the way back, Forest got into the lost in the playoff semi-finals in quite heartbreaking fashion in 2003 with a really good young team. That was a team with Michael Dawson and Andy Reid and David Prutton and Marlon Harewood, who was actually a very
Marlon Harewood was a good player,
very good player,
especially at that level.
Yeah, for a while he was a really good. I mean, particularly then when he was very young and was kind of still relatively raw, but scored a lot of goals for Forest. Had Darren Huckabee on loan, who was obviously a brilliant player at that level and went on to be a hero at Norwich. But after that season, there was this real kind of opportunity to build on that kind of success, that kind of team and that success under Paul Hart, and it didn't happen. Forest didn't really sign anyone, and it all kind of collapsed from there. The team broke up, and obviously Reid and Dawson was sold, I think the following year, maybe the year after.
We took them both off your hands at Spurs.
Yeah. And it was eerily similar in January. There was this kind of very promising team with a manager who had a certain he had a style of play and didn't really have an alternative style of play, but it could have worked if they'd signed an extra striker to take the load off Lewis Grabban, or they'd signed another winger to give an option when the starting two wingers were knackered, or had maybe signed, I don't know, another left back or something like that. But they just didn't do anything, and no one reasonable was expecting Forest to spend £5 million on someone, or try and, I don't know, rival West Ham for Jared Bowen or someone like that. But it was that nothing was done. That was the sort of kicker that eventually came back to bite them.
I feel like in a strange way that actually, like you're quite right. You're not expecting like Championship sides to spend huge amounts of money at the moment, but I feel like because of the climate in the Premier League, there are a lot of clubs who want to get players temporarily off their wage bills, and there's a little bit of opportunity in that, like for the loan market certainly. You talk about glut of players and it's kind of the slightly muddled recruiting. Talk me through the structure above. Well, Chris Hughton's come in, good man, good coach. What does the certainly look like above him at the moment between him and the owner?
Interesting question. There certainly have been in the last 6 months or so a number of people with all the sort of job titles that you would expect from a modern forward-thinking football club. So there's a sporting director, and there's a head of recruitment, and there's a head of international recruitment or something like that. One of which was
so someone's watched a documentary, basically.
Yes, they've asked someone to, compile a report about what a football club should look like. There you go. One of them, a guy called Jose Inigo, was, I think, the head of international recruitment. I think he was. Was kind of arrived a little while ago. Much was made of contacts and so on and so forth. I believe there was, at some point, there was a link up with Uncle Jorge Mendes, who is obviously doing his thing to great effect at Wolves. And this guy, a couple of weeks ago, it emerged that this guy Jose Inigo had been arrested in France for something or other. At which point, it was then kind of the news was hurriedly ushered out that his contract had actually ended at Forest in the summer, and he wasn't involved anymore. As far as I'm aware, this wasn't, this was the first that anyone knew, that they had made any public acknowledgement that he was no longer involved in things, which sort of sums up the way that that Forest are run and are governed. That it sort of, no, there was no forethought to any of this. It was just sort of this news was ushered out at a time where to kind of alleviate a little bit of embarrassment. But there are theoretical structures in place. Apparently, he wasn't the man solely in charge of transfers, but apparently Sabri Lamucci had plenty of involvement in the recruitment and the selection of all the transfers this summer, which made it even more strange that he was sacked after 4 games. On the surface of it, the collapse at the end of last season and the fact that Forest lost those 4 games doesn't make it a particularly surprising decision, but having decided to stick with him in the summer after that collapse and then giving him a kind of key role in signing these 13 players to sack him just sort of speaks to the sort of muddled thinking. There was a lot of optimism from people who kind of know more about what goes on at the club than I do when the current owners came in a few years ago. That seems to have now more or less disappeared, and while we're not quite at the levels of the chaos that existed at the club under Fawaz Al-Hassawi a few years ago, it's sort of trending that way, as I believe the phrase is at the moment.
So Chris Hughton is obviously a very well-respected manager at that level. Probably doesn't get the respect at the higher level that he's due. I mean, he's still been promoted 3 times in the Championship, I think. Has anything changed to accommodate him, Nick?
Well, it's difficult to say. He will undoubtedly have been made kind of assurances and promises, because this wouldn't have been the first job that he would have been offered since leaving Brighton. I think he was almost appointed Bristol City manager, I think.
That's right. Yep.
So promises no doubt will have been made. The honest answer is I don't know whether anything has changed or what has been kind of promised to him. But of course, the real answer will come in time. It doesn't really matter what's been promised to him. It matters what is actually put in place, or what is done in the coming few months, which historically there is a gap between not just with this ownership, with previous ownerships, and the one before Al-Hassawi. Things have been said, and the reality often does not line up to the things that have been said and the things that have been promised. So the simple answer is I don't know, and even if I did know, who knows whether it would actually kind of come to fruition.
And what's the response been like from the fan base? Because obviously, like, start of this season, the conditions around the country, the general state of football, that's enough to suck the life out of pretty much anyone. But is this a well-received appointment?
The thing about pretty much everything that Forest have done this summer is that you can, in isolation, you can make cases, or not even make cases. Pretty much everything in isolation looks like a very sensible decision. So, for example, you could go through most of the 13 players that have been signed so far and go, yeah, that makes sense. Like, for example, signed Cyrus Christie, who is probably better than the two existing right-backs that Forest already had on the books. Scott McKenna is apparently, I confess I don't watch enough Scottish football to
Sure.
know about him, but people who know much more about him say he's the real thing, and particularly at Championship level.
Knockhart is at Championship level a really good player potentially. Like he's
Knockhart, exactly the kind of thing that Forest need. Lyle Taylor, exactly the sort of player that Forest needed as someone who could support and frequently step in for Lewis Grabban. Jack Colback, again, very decent Championship level player, needed someone to fill the role that Ben Watson left when he left the club in the summer. Sacking Lamucci after such a bad run of results, entirely kind of, in the context of modern football anyway, entirely understandable decision. Appointing Chris Hughton, ideal, perfect. Exactly the sort of, theoretically, exactly the sort of manager that you want when you got a squad full of theoretically talented players at the championship level, who need someone to just kind of knit them all together and make sense of it all. The problem is that all of these theoretically sensible decisions are being made in this kind of general maelstrom of chaos that that is kind of partly brought about because there are so many of these decisions. It would have made, as a whole, it would have made more sense if 5 of those decisions had been made this summer. If they'd signed 4 or 5 players to complement the quite strong team that Forest already had, and then maybe change the manager to better suit those players. But it's the complete change of everything and the ripping up and starting again after what was objectively the best season that Forest have had in quite a long time. Obviously, it's the context is that Forest collapsed horribly at the end of last season, but we finished 7th and very close to getting into the playoffs, when a couple of seasons ago we only survived on goal difference on the last day of the season.
Hey, that was a really strong Championship last season as well. I mean, it's not exactly, it wasn't a weak year.
Exactly. So it is the kind of overarching kind of context, if you like, if that doesn't sound too stupid a way of framing it, that makes you wonder whether anyone really knows what they're doing, and makes you wonder whether any of these decisions are actually sensible when kind of brought together and coalesced as a whole. And the appointment of Hughton exemplifies that, really. Theoretically ideal, theoretically exactly the sort of man you want in charge of this group of players, and theoretically exactly the sort of man you want to be trying to make sense of an incredibly chaotic club. But you just fear that everything, all of this, is going to be sucked into this gaping maw that is Nottingham Forest.
What an excellent place that would be to finish. Okay, so tell me, am I right in thinking that the Athletic is adding a Forest podcast to its repertoire in the very near future?
You would be right in thinking that, and I'm thanks, Sam. I'm glad you asked.
Is it called Maelstrom of Chaos?
It should be. Now we have actually we're making some final plans for that later on today, and maybe I should suggest a change of name. No, the name of the podcast is 2 Stars, a Nottingham Forest podcast, which obvious reference to the European Cups, and a little dash of suitable self-deprecation as well. So yes, if all goes to plan, the first episode will be going out next week, and next week is, for people listening at the time of this, it will be on the 22nd of October, which a few weeks ago we decided that it would be the ideal time to do it because it would be the day before Forest against Derby, Now that is starting to look like a less wise decision in terms of our kind of sanity and general sort of general morale. But it's going to be Matt Davis Adams, who presenter of the Totally Football League show, fine commentator all round, and
good voice, Matt Davis Adams.
Terrific voice,
great voice for podcasting.
Excellent, excellent presenter. He'll be presenting. Paul Taylor, the Athletics Nottingham Forest correspondent, will be the man. Yeah, will be the man to tell you what's actually going on, and then there'll be me on kind of general bullshit duty, just sort of talking around those guys and coming in with stupid opinions and stupid theories. And then we'll obviously have there'll be interviews on there. There'll be other guests, obviously Daniel Taylor, obviously also of the Athletic, long involved with Forest and lifelong Forest fan,
brilliant
a number of books about Forest. So I believe he'll be on the or hopefully he'll be on the first edition as well. So yeah, that'll be a weekly Nottingham Forest podcast for anyone who wants to enjoy us sort of wallowing in misery, really.
Fantastic, mate. I've enjoyed this. It's been great. Actually, you know what? This has worked. We very deliberately didn't do any preparation for this, and that seemed like a really good idea until about 15 minutes before we started recording. But I remember I was walking the dog with my wife just before we started, and I kind of, my adrenaline started to rise a bit. Like, I think I should have done something. Because it's just, but we got away with it, and it's hopefully people have enjoyed it. And yeah, as Nick says, go and find the new pod as and when it's out. That's a Thursday, isn't it, Nick?
We're recording on Thursday. I think it'll be either out on Thursday or Friday.
Okay, Friday morning, fantastic.
But yes, it'll be certainly from next week.
Okay, find that in all the usual places with the Athletics podcast output. Brilliant, thanks, Nick. Thank you so much for coming in.
No worries.